Hi everyone and welcome to TOOP TV. Behind me here is our new office. Stay tuned over the next few months for the updates on the restoration. Today we're taking a special look at Golden Grove. If you're thinking of moving to this area, find out everything you need to know from our suburb insiders and take a tour through some of the properties available in this suburb. In SA's finest, we have a special treat for you in the form of this stunning character home in Prospect. And of course we're live and interactive today. Don't hesitate to email your questions through to us so we can answer them for you. Well, it's been a huge week this week in news with the redevelopment of Adelaide Oval, and we're going to discuss that more later in the show. Today, joining me is RP Data's Cameron Cusher to talk about what's going on in the market. Now let's go into the inside story on why less new homes are being built in South Australia.
While the rest of the nation moves forward, it appears South Australia may be getting left behind, with our new home market stuck in reverse. Across Australia, sales of new homes rose by 0.6%, while the state sales plummeted by 12.9% in the past 3 months. It's feared this will cost SA in economic growth and in jobs, as it's already affected our population. Over the past decade, the proportion of Australians living in Adelaide has dropped, while for the majority of capital cities, this figure has increased. But this doesn't come as a surprise to some of our locals.
I feel we're in a good position if we are looking at buying, but not if we're trying to sell at this point. We're a lot more conservative in Adelaide. That's possibly why.
The Housing Industry Association is insisting the state government takes action to kickstart a weak new home building sector. But at this stage, it appears that there is no relief in sight, as current new home building approval statistics suggest the downward trend is likely to continue.
Well, there's certainly some interesting statistics there on new homes being built in South Australia. I think it's one of those things that we're just going to have to keep our eye on. Joining me today in the studio is South Australian President of the Property Council, Justin Hazel. Good afternoon and welcome.
Hi Mandy, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you here, and certainly on the back end of your successful seminar that you've just had at Robe.
Oh, we had a great time at Robe. Obviously visited the idyllic portside town in the southeast, and we had about 120 delegates and presenters there, and talked all about property issues affecting South Australia and the national environment.
Which is certainly a popular discussion around the country right at this moment.
Yes.
Just can we briefly tell me what you do?
Well, I'm, as you said, I'm the State President of the Property Council of Australia, and I sit on the National Board of the Property Council. Our members control about $6 billion worth of property development and investments across the country, and we represent their interests and act as an advocate to ensure appropriate government policy to support the industry and, in fact, the wider economy.
It's interesting that you just keep your eye on the whole country and what's going on there. And in that vein, I guess, you know, there's a 30-year plan here in Adelaide, which you're heavily involved with, which incorporates high-density living. Where do you see that going in the future?
Yeah, well, the 30-year plan and where it's heading is actually a really relevant, highly relevant topic at the moment. We've got a 30-year plan that calls for 70% infill growth and 30% traditional greenfield growth. Now, at the moment, we've got a position where it's a bit of a dilemma. We need to try to encourage the market to take up that 70% infill target, and the government's already involved in organising and assembling sites, such as the Bowden Village site, just down by Hindmarsh. Actually, it's Bowden, which is going to accommodate part of that. And there's a whole lot of other sites that have been earmarked for infill growth. One of the biggest issues that we've got is there's currently a misalignment of government policy. On the one hand, you've got government policy advocating for infill, and yet you've got government policy which act as a deterrent to that infill growth. We've just completed a study and released a study which suggests that at the moment the high density apartment sector is paying about $70,000 per apartment in costs and contributions, which are not levied on the traditional greenfield sector. And those kinds...
Sorry to interrupt you, that $70,000 is that the consumer paying or is that a government paying?
No, that's 70,000 that gets levied on the ultimate consumer. And that exacerbates the current issue that we have in the affordability stakes. You've got greenfield projects, greenfield development. For $400,000 you get a 3-bedroom house with a pool in the southern or the northern suburbs. For $400,000 you get a 2-bedroom apartment with 1 bathroom. So there's misalignment in terms of what you can actually get, and for $100,000 more you can get a single-fronted cottage in Parkside. But
so if we're looking at high density, is it not that it's a certain demographic we're looking to live in the city? So there's city dwellers compared to suburb dwellers?
Yeah, there are different demographics for both for both of those different areas, but the demographics are continuously changing. I actually believe personally there's a massive market for empty nesters, retirees, to move into vertical accommodation, and it could be vertical retirement, but it could just be apartment type living that's catered specifically for those people. But in order to encourage them and the other potential buyers to embrace apartment living, embrace high density living, we need to cut out the stamp duty, the open space contributions and the other charges which are unfairly levied on the high density sector. Now that $70,000 includes $5,500 for open space contributions. It includes about $11,500 in stamp duty, which is levied just on that product. There's $40,000 for car parking charges, and there's also mandatory energy rating requirements, which cost about an extra $13,000 for an apartment development in comparison to a traditional house.
So the high density that we're talking about in the city, for instance, and the 30-year plan is looking at the infrastructure to back up the high density?
Well, yeah, a lot of the infrastructure is already in place in the infill areas. So you're talking about, but there are additional infrastructure investment opportunities which are currently being considered, including electrification of railway networks and transit corridors, etc. So a lot of the infrastructure is in place, but there will be more rolled out to support it.
Okay, so you've produced a paper. Is this going to be available for the consumer to be able to look at where they're going in the next 30 years?
Yes, it is. I mean, we've released this paper. This is publicly available. We've provided a copy to government. Government's currently weighing it up and considering how they're going to respond to it, but it is also available on our Property Council website.
Okay. Look, stay with me. I think there's more that we can discuss later on in the show, but thank you. Now, let's go behind the blinds.